Welcome to the Contemporary Issues Sunday School class, where we come to get schooled, and we will today. We are going to learn about Africa, the democracies of Africa, from our resident anthropologist, Dr. Peter Van Arsdale. We are so glad to learn that, and maybe Peter will even tell us a little bit about the religious makeup of Africa.
That will be touched on.
Touched on,
Will be
good.
touched on, yes, it will.
There's a lot of growth there, I understand, in
There
religious
is, especially
belief and
in
practice.
Christianity.
In Christianity especially. Very good. It will be our tie to church today. Very good. But our usual announcements, Zoomers, nice to have you here. Susan, can you hear me okay? Just double checking. Thank you for the thumbs up. Nice to have you here. And we are recording this for future playback. And any other announcements? We have a party coming up August 31st. We're in August now, end of this month, the last day, a Sunday. So church and then a Sunday school party and fellowships. Hope you can come, and we will send out the address and bring food, potluck. Bring your own food and pot to the potluck. And whatever else you would like.
That was good, Steve.
Sorry, I can't pass up a good opportunity. That's right. And I always like to plug other classes that are going on at St. So look on the website, there are classes going on the website too. Any other announcements or things in the news? There's not much in the news these days. It's very quiet in America. I do want to share about Frank Atwood's potluck party coming up also on the 8/15. All are invited to potatoes and potluck at Frank's and Maureen Supple's home on Friday at 6 o'clock. And I've got their address and more information here if you'd like to do that. So if you're free, come and spend some time with Frank and Maureen. Yes, sir.
So the analysis of deaths in the state of Colorado has been, it was recently published between 2019 and now. And the change now is that rather than dying of natural causes, that they're actually stating when people die that are older, what the reasons are. So it's the first set of statistics that show people that are elderly that have like malnutrition and versus other kinds of things that are considered to be, rather than it just being classified as, I found it to be highly enlightening to take a look at the changes that what's happening. Department of Health.
Department of Health.
It was in the Denver Post.
Okay, lots of changes going on, including to NPR and PBS this week. Of course, the federal funding stopped for those, but it doesn't mean that all of the stations will go out of business. They will just have to try to replace those federal funds with other funds, as I understand it. But the organization above that helps manage giving the funds to PBS and NPR, that was completely closed, called the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Their 100 employees were let go because of the federal funding. So lots of changes going on. Yes, Susie.
Be the head of it. I mean.
No.
So
I guess no more. There's no more federal funds going to.
they're in charge of their own, is that it? Like.
Each station is now.
Each local station will just have to make up those funds if they can.
Yeah, but they get corporate funding too, so somebody has to distribute that.
No, not
I
anymore.
think they manage it themselves, Susie, each of the local stations.
To ask for more.
Yes, Norley.
I understand that our local stations are now concerned about having their licenses actually revoked by the administration.
Mhm.
So that is sort of the next.
Yes, when we had the lady here as guest speaker from PBS, she was saying that there's talk about revenge against anyone who has spoken against the Trump administration, and they may try to rescind their licenses. So it's in the wind also.
Got lots of stuff to cover here.
We got a lot of stuff to cover. Yes, sir. We do. So we are ready to give this to Dr. Peter Van Arsdale. Very quickly, I'm going to mention that Dr. Van Arsdale got his doctorate in cultural anthropology at University of Colorado Boulder, and he conducted his doctoral research in Indonesia. He's been a full and part-time professor at DU, University of Denver, for many years. And in 1978, he co-founded the Hospice of Metro Denver, one of his other projects. And we are glad to have him and his wife Kathy here today with us. So please welcome Peter Van Arsdale.
Thank you. I know most of you folks are great friends, and thanks for coming to another of my presentations. I'm delighted that Steve invited me. Is the microphone working okay?
Yeah.
Great. Also want to welcome my brother-in-law, Steve, and my sister-in-law, Rebecca, who are here as well. Thanks for coming. So, my friends, yes, we're going to talk about democracies in Africa, and following a suggestion from Steve several weeks ago, briefly, Africa writ large. So let's get an overview of Africa before we dive into some of the things that we want to narrow in on. So if you can get that back up there for us, Steve, it'll be great. Thank you very much.
There we go. Tell me where you want to go and
Just
I'll
leave it like
Okay.
that. Yeah, just leave it like that. So briefly to remind you, we've got, let's see if my laser pointer will work on this screen. Huh.
Guess not.
Sometimes they don't work well on screens of this sort. I found that previously. Okay, I'm gonna walk over there. And I'll speak loudly for a moment.
Let me ask a quick question. How many folks here have been to Africa?
Oh,
my goodness.
terrific.
It is the vast
That's
majority of our
80% of the
class.
people. That's terrific.
No wonder.
That's marvelous.
Yes.
I've been to Egypt, so therefore I've been to Africa.
So while I'm doing this, Steve, if you'd be kind enough to get those pages into each person's hand, that'd be terrific. Thank you.
Mhm.
Steve has a one-page handout that I'll talk about in a little while for each person. So briefly then to remind you, we've got 54 countries in Africa. I'm going to talk just about countries today that are in sub-Saharan Africa, but briefly again, remember, North Africa is basically the countries in the north, which include the Saharan desert countries. So if you think of Libya or Algeria or Egypt, Morocco, etc., that's North Africa. Equally important, but not part of our topic today. So the Sahara Desert running across here, of course. Then we have the important area called the Sahel, which is this savanna-like and quasi-desert-like area that runs about here through these countries, virtually entirely across the continent, from Mali through Sudan, and much of that is savanna country. It's desolate. I've spent a good deal of time there. And then we move on to what's generally a surprise called Central Africa, which is in the center. Clever, eh? I didn't come up with that title, someone else did. So Central Africa includes such places as Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is the largest singular country by geography. And then, of course, we also speak of East Africa, which are these countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, etc. over here. That's where I've spent most of my work, most of my time. I've worked in 5 different countries there. And then we talk about Southern Africa, to be distinguished from South Africa, because clearly, and as Vicki and I were also commenting about South Africa, that's a country. But when we refer to Southern Africa, we're referring to several countries down here from Zimbabwe through Namibia to Lesotho, etc. So North, and then let's say something about the West. West Africa generally is considered, sometimes they say coastal West Africa. The many countries and small countries here from Senegal through Togo, through Cameroon, etc. This whole stretch here. We're going to talk briefly today about Ghana, which is in that western stretch. Many of those have a French language tradition. Others have an English language tradition from the colonial era, and still others a few German language traditions, etc. Even a few variant Dutch language traditions down in Afrikaner traditions in South Africa. So that's a very brief overview. I want to tell you that 19% of the world lives in Africa. That's 1.5 billion people. That's the population of the continent, of the 54 countries of Africa. It's phenomenal, huge, and growing faster than any other general area in the world.
Really?
Nigeria.
Steve, my brother-in-law, has nicely handed out a page to each of you good folks. It's complimentary to my talk today. I hope you'll have a chance. I've been privileged to record 3 podcasts in the last year for the Coalition Against Global Genocide. You have them listed here on the handout. If you have a chance to go to Spotify, you can get right in and find them. There's a listing. You just get into Spotify, which many of you use, and go right through, and you can find the ones. But I want to call your attention to the 2 I did on Africa. As you'll see, there's one on Sudan and Darfur, and there's one on South Sudan. Those are critically important countries that, as you know, are struggling mightily. And so while that's not a main theme today, because we're talking about democracy and related developments, I just want to let you know that particularly the genocidal issues in Sudan are the worst in the world, numerically, by far, more than Ukraine, more than Gaza, by far, numerically. So I hope you might have a chance to listen to one or more of my podcasts at your convenience in the near future.
Peter, question?
Sure.
Just quickly, is that tribal warfare, tribes warring for control?
And even more broadly, ethnic groups and military factions.
Okay.
Yeah.
One control.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's disastrous. It's disastrous. So here's the approach. And I want to thank Julia Paley, a fellow anthropologist, for many of her good insights. Here's the approach an anthropologist might take in thinking about this. And I hope you'll like it, because it's not simply that I'm going to say, here's what makes a good democracy, here's what makes a less good democracy. I'll talk about some of those issues. But what are the broad concepts that we look at? What are the processes that we think about historically and sociologically and anthropologically and politically to understand what it means to have a democracy? So, my friends, part of my goal today is to share, humbly speaking, things that I think make a good democracy anywhere. And of course, your comments will be welcomed. For the last 60 years, anthropologists and others, of course, no surprise, have been interested in the cultures of Africa, of the ethnic groups of Africa, of the tribes of Africa. Of course, those are things anthropologists are interested in. Even before the 60 years, but the last 60 years have been the modern era of investigation, post-colonial. Early anthropologists got locked into colonial perspectives, which were not that helpful. In fact, were sometimes very racist. And just as an aside, because one of you nice folks asked me a few weeks ago about the concept of race. Of course, we talk about races. I have to tell you that term is virtually worthless conceptually. It's virtually worthless. It's a construct that's sociological. It's not something viable biologically. It's not viable biologically. There's all sorts of people with variations and different types. And to say that there might be the African race or the Caucasian race, or they used to have the Mongoloid race for people in the Far East, or the San, the Bushman race for people in the southwestern part of Africa. Let me tell you, those racial constructs spoken of in that way are absolutely useless. That's why I don't even use the word race. When I'm asked on a form, what race are you? It irritates me every time somebody asks me what race I am. I'd rather say what ethnic group I'm associated with. We're all associated with ethnic groups. Everybody, your ancient history, your more recent history, everyone has an ethnic group that they're interested in, or a tribal group that they're proud of. So that's just an aside, but it does relate to the way anthropologists have been wrestling with what's happening in Africa and elsewhere. There's no single definition of democracy. And there are many ways to look at it. And as one person said, and I like this approach, there are entangled processes that develop in nations and among people that influence democracy. That's a pretty good way to say it. Entangled processes, all sorts of things going on. It's not a single thing. And in Africa, particularly post 1960, which is considered primarily the post-colonial era, one person said again, let's look at the problem of democracy in the new states, the forces that erode it, and the factors that might establish or strengthen it. Yeah, and so that's what I'm going to try to do today. Now, you might find it interesting to know that in several countries, a number of African countries, folks have been interested, no surprise, in building on their traditions and their traditional cultural understandings of power, of community, of legitimacy. And Western style democracy, as we might know it, with its electoral processes and the things that we think are important, and they are, isn't always the first thing that folks think about, including folks developing democracies in Africa. And some of the folks have started with some very interesting traditions that are quite different. Let me share just a couple of those different traditions with you.
Peter, could I just?
Oh, sure, jump in while
In
I have to put the microphone down. That's the distinction. Go ahead.
your description in the email I sent to the class, you said there are about 10 viable democracies in Africa now. Is that out of the 54 countries?
I would say when we say 10, that includes about 5 that are on the border, iffy,
Okay,
and
okay.
about 5 that are relatively solid, which I'll talk, 3 of the 5 that are relatively solid, I'll talk about today. I'd say it's stretching it. I put that in the 8 to 10 is a stretch.
Okay.
5 are relatively solid, another 3 or 4 tangential. Yeah. Not many from the 54 countries.
Are the others dictatorships? What's the
Every array you have, the official economy index does not refer to those that are extreme as dictatorships, although some are. They just call them extreme authoritarian.
Okay.
Yeah, of which there are a number, over a dozen. And we'll get back to that. It's a great question, Steve. Well, here's the way a couple of countries have considered democracy as they think about their own traditions and their own backgrounds. I thought this is pretty interesting. In Mozambique, so let's see, Steve, since my pointer is not connecting, you can show us where Mozambique is over there. Thank you. On the East Coast, right there.
Oh, there.
Oh, good. Thank you very much, Steve. Perfect. That's Mozambique. And in Mozambique, for example, which is a population of 35 million people. For most of the countries I'm going to talk about, I'll tell you how many people live there because it's interesting, and you guys are always interested in demography. The official democratic procedures, such as elections, which have evolved in Mozambique, have been shaped in part by the idioms of sorcery. Yes, and the ways that people have conceptualized traditionally sorcery, which, by the way, is not all bad. It's seen by many people as helpful. They've used some of those idioms from sorcery and applied them to their understandings of a reshaped emergent democracy. Isn't that something? It's fascinating. Now, when there was a workshop in the 1990s, led by, unfortunately, the late USAID, which I so sad that agency is passing away. That is such a crime. When USAID led a workshop in the 1990s on democratic development in Mozambique, they, to their credit, aimed to incorporate traditional authorities into the electoral structure. So tribal chiefs were used, their values were appreciated, and even though some of the chiefs had been known to be brutal and coercive, they also, no surprise, were powerful and respected. And so some of the shall we say, chieftainly, if that's a word, and I just made it up. Some of the chieftainly impetus was there as they wrestled, and as that demographic workshop led by USAID wrestled with how to help Mozambique move in these directions. Fascinating, fascinating. And another example I'll give of how tradition has shaped, Steve, you can show us Nigeria, which of course is a huge country up there on the Western zone. Move on over there. There's Nigeria.
Huh?
That is, can everybody put your little finger there, your hand, perfecto. I've been to Abuja, that's the capital, very nice city actually. And Nigeria is by far the largest country in Africa. 238 million people. Oh, it's mind blowing how big it is. And that's part of the problems they're wrestling with. The official democratic, so-called demographic procedures, and this is one of those that's kind of on the edge of those countries I mentioned, Steve.
Okay.
Such as elections, have been reshaped through indigenous ritual practice. There are many interesting tribal, and for example, among the Yoruba people, Y-O-R-U-B-A, among the Yoruba people, and some of their ritual practices have been brought to bear as they engage people and make them more enthusiastic about possible democratic procedures. So it's fascinating that these things are done and appreciated by folks. Well, here are some of the kinds of democracies, because I mentioned there's so many by label. This is not even a complete listing, but as best as I can determine, there's about 6 that we might call democracies that we can represent. And I won't be talking about all 6 of these, but I'm going to give you some names. The state that is quite interested in the collective well-being of its citizens and does so under a rather ominous but seemingly well-intended hand is Rwanda. Rwanda post-genocide, which is over 25 years ago now. I'm sure I'll keep talking and Steve will find these on the map for us.
Small.
Rwanda is a small country. It's a small country. It has a population of only 15 million people. Compare that to Nigeria with 230 million. Scale makes a difference. Size makes a difference. But it is a state-provided, collective, well-being oriented organizational structure, not labeled officially as a democracy, but under Paul Kagame, and I've heard Paul Kagame speak when he came to the University of Denver some years ago. He's the president, has been now, ever since the genocide. The notion there is keep things intact, improve social service, get more women involved in legislature and in social service and other important activities, including education, respect the women as you do the men, and be a regional military power. That little country is one of the most important militaristically in all of Africa. And they let people know it. In the Congo, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in Burundi, to name 4 of their neighboring countries, Rwandan troops and military have been advisors and also involved in incursions. Most recently, ominously, in Eastern Congo. So that's not a democracy, but it's an important country to know about as we complement our interest in democracies. Now, this is a country you might not have heard of. As many of you have heard of the Kingdom of Swaziland, right? Yeah, I hope everybody's nodding their head. Well, guess what? It's now called Eswatini. The king decided to change the name, and now Eswatini, you got it right there, perfect. You're good with that computer, Steve. There's Swaziland, just recently became Eswatini, the Kingdom of Eswatini. Why do I mention it? Well, each country is important, but Eswatini is one of the only monarchies still existing in Africa. It's a little bitty country of only 1 or 2 million people. Swaziland used to be, now Eswatini. but it's a monarchy. Do they discuss democracy? Oh, widely. Is it technically listed as a democracy? It is not. And so that leads to one of my points. Many people, many institutions, many governments use the term democracy because it sounds cool, and they're not democracies. Yeah, one example, you got it.
Peter, is it the blue circle, Swaziland?
That's it. That's
Okay.
Eswatini.
It's just the blue circle.
It's just that little blue circle, that's Eswatini.
Okay.
So still a different kind of country. Now, next, a political democracy where crowds have been mobilized, where people have been wooed for their support, where they're out there on the streets trying to get people involved in what could be more democratic processes. An example would be early on, back to about 2010 and 2011, when I was there, South Sudan. So Steve, we can now move up to South Sudan, just over there. You've got it, very good. There's South Sudan. You see the capital of Juba. South Sudan is the newest independent country on the African continent. I was there as the referendum to seek independence was being voted on. Very important. The people were given a vote as to what they wanted. Did they want to stay with Sudan, which they've been a part of, where you can see it on the map? Or did they want to truly gain a new country, which had been in the offing for decades, been discussed, including by political and rebel leaders for decades? I've met a couple of those leaders. Very diligent, hard-driving, honest people.
Peter,
And so, hang on a second, please. So South Sudan, I literally went one day to the grave in the capital of one of its most famous heroes. And I need this is a side point today, but it's very important. Throughout much of Africa, elsewhere in the world too, the notion of the big man is really important. And that's actually a phrase used by anthropologists. Sorry, ladies, I wish I could say it was the big woman. It rarely is. I wish it was more often. It isn't. It's usually the big man with all the clout, charisma, and other things that go with that, being a big man. So I went to the grave of the big man, John Garang, in South Sudan, and paid my respects. By the way, he got his doctorate at Iowa State University in agriculture. And then, yeah, and then 100 yards to the side, I walked over and greeted some of the Sudanese people there. They were all lined up, waiting to vote, to cast their ballot for the new referendum and thus their new country, which came to bear 8 months later. I was privileged to be there during that process of the voting. So someone else had a question.
yeah, I just wondered where Darfur,
Yeah, we'll get back to that.
you know,
Yeah.
and if that had an influence on that election.
Yeah, on the Sudanese election.
Exactly.
Indirectly it did, Eric. Yes, indirectly it did. That's a very good point. Yeah. And I'm not meaning to skirt Darfur, but only to say, hopefully you'll listen to my podcast on Darfur, which is 45 to 50 minutes long. And hopefully you'll appreciate that podcast. But Darfur is the tragic genocidal area right now in Africa. There has been 2 genocides in Darfur, labeled officially genocides in West Sudan, Darfur. So it's very important, Eric, as you're suggesting. So in any event, early on in South Sudan, there was this great notion for democracy, the new nation evolving from 2011, just 14 years ago on. I'm trying to tell you, my friends, it has been squashed, repressed under an ominous leader named Salva Kiir, K-I-I-R. And the various tribal groups and ethnic groups have battled back and forth. Much of the issue there is tribal and interethnic. And is there a democracy that they had voted toward? There is not. Have the many different peace plans to bring down the fighting there, which has been horrific at times, led to anything? intermittently a bit of stoppage. Over long term, not. My good friend Pagan Amum Ekiech, who is originally from South Sudan and now lives in Denver, has been one of the lead negotiators trying to bring about peace in South Sudan, trying to bring about democracy. And among other people, he recently talked to not the current Pope, but the previous Pope, and he sent me a picture of himself shaking hands with the Pope. People are trying hard, working with little success in South Sudan. So what about another kind of a democracy, a so-called market-driven democracy? These are supposedly tied to the economic well-being and international connections that people have. And so South Africa probably could be listed as a market-driven democracy. Now, let me, among my many cards, which are quasi-organized, Kathy knows I have stacks of cards everywhere throughout my house, of which she politely reminds me that I should shuffle better. I try. Oh, my stacks of cards. So The Economist, a very good and representative magazine, in my opinion. Kathy and I studied it extensively. I know some of the others of the folks here in the room do too. The Economist has a democracy index that it publishes every so often. Steve is nodding, he's aware of it. Now, as I said, it's a stretch to say there's 8 or 10 democracies or quasi-democracies in Africa. The Economist would say probably 5. Let me name the 5. We'll be saying more about several of these. Ghana, you don't need to switch around here yet, Steve. Ghana, Botswana, that might surprise you. South Africa, also Namibia and Lesotho. Now, just for a moment, Steve, let's go to the southern cone. I guess you have the southern cone on the screen. You'll notice Lesotho, South Africa, Botswana, and Namibia are all in Southern Africa.
Yep.
That's not a coincidence. They've influenced one another, often favorably. Are they perfect? They are not. But 4 of the 5 that are deemed the most relevant are in Southern Africa. The others, Ghana. We'll talk about Ghana in a few minutes. So I think that's very interesting. Now, let's say a bit more about South Africa, since you and I are particularly interested in that.
You can go on a mission trip.
Yeah, exactly. How many other folks have been to South Africa? Oh, terrific. Wow, that is terrific. 10 people. So South Africa, population of 63 million people. It's technically a constitutional republic or a parliamentary republic. The president is elected by parliament. There are 2 houses in parliament. These are things that are sounding democratic, aren't they? Institutions, parliaments, representative. They have provincial legislatures throughout the country that are elected. And there are 9 provinces. Apartheid ended in 1994. Since then, the African National Congress, which is a major political party, has dominated. Nelson Mandela served as president through the African National Congress from 1994 to 1999. Now, I have a little aside to share with you that's quite personal for me there. And that is, here it is, that Dennis Brutus, Brutus, a famous activist from South Africa, who, because of his activism and various other things, speaking out against apartheid in the 80s and early 90s, well, even before, way back before, Dennis Brutus was imprisoned with Nelson Mandela. Many of you know the story that Nelson Mandela served many years in prison on the infamous Robben Island, Robben, Robben Island in South Africa. Many years. In the cell next to Nelson Mandela was Dennis Brutus for at least 2 years. I had the privilege of being on a panel with Dennis Brutus about democracy over 20 years ago. He's now deceased. That was my privilege. He was fantastic. So the other person from South Africa that I was privileged to meet and work with a bit through DU was one of the assistant ministers of the Interior. And he came to DU because we have an African program there and was interested in what we were doing with trade and that kind of thing through Colorado and as reported by DU. So I also had a chance to work with that minister when he came twice. In fact, the second time he came and said to me, "Hi, Dr. Peter, you're my old friend." I thought, well, I hope that's good to be a friend of this particular minister. I think so. Some of them have been a little sketchy. So South Africa then is extremely interesting. And those are a few of the statistics and interesting situations there. Kathy, to her credit, recently put me onto an article, again from The Economist. There are two tragic things, among others, happening in South Africa that diminish the democracy and weaken the government and the people. Well, really three things. But in this article that Kathy had sent my way, there are assassins gangs basically roaming the country, and assassins for hire that apparently are not too hard to locate and ominously kill political and other opponents. And they're wide-ranging enough that there's an article about them. The second set of gangs of a different type, equally ominous, taking advantage of people who are working in the famous African mines. Do you know 40% of the world's gold, probably over time, in recent times, has come from South Africa. The mines in South Africa are gigantic, underground, down sometimes a mile, and then with shafts, horizontal, for other miles. I don't know how many miles, but miles. People are down in those mines, sometimes officially on government business. But recently, so many people desperate to make a buck have been down there illegally. Sometimes illegal miners are called artisan. Sounds kind of catchy, an artisan miner. Well, it really means an illegal miner who's trying to scrape out a buck and live. Some of those illegal and artisan miners are down there, and gangs are exploiting them and taking advantage of them. And in one case, a guy wasn't allowed to come back to the surface for days until he could produce a little bit of gold to give to the gang leader. Strange, but amazing and tragic in a so-called democracy. Now, I want to mention that the democracies we've mentioned, all five that are the strongest, according to The Economist, and according to my research too, are called actually flawed democracies. There's no such thing as a perfect democracy. It's too complicated, and we wish there were such things, but there aren't. But they're flawed democracies. I want to tell you, my friends, on the same listing, the United States of America is a flawed democracy.
Amen.
Yep. That's how it's listed. We are not listed as a full-blown, fruitful democracy. What are the three countries in the Americas that are? Canada, Costa Rica, and Uruguay. Yep. Isn't that interesting? According to this index, which looks at many different indicators and measurements, we are a flawed democracy, and the five that are strongest in Africa are all listed as flawed democracies. Well,
Uruguay.
I'm sorry.
I said Uruguay.
Yeah.
That's how they say it.
So what's a liberal democracy? Well, okay, these again are different characterizations. A liberal democracy is premised on the equality of all citizens. That's the essential premise. And let's talk then about two that I categorize as liberal democracies, Botswana and Ghana. So Botswana is relatively large geographically, but only has 2.5 million people. Yeah, and you know, the famous film, The Gods Must Be Crazy, when the guy finds a Coke bottle, and you all remember the great story. That's from 1980, 45 years ago. I can see it like yesterday. You people, Steve's nodding, everybody. Yeah, I remember that great film. That film captured the life of a San, meaning a bushman. Some people think bushman is a pejorative term, so we have to be careful in using that, but I don't use it pejoratively. But the San people are only 3% of the Botswana population. So there's only a few thousand San or bushman people. Just as an aside, that film, by the way, got Best Film of the Year in the Botswana Film Festival. Wait, I forgot to tell you the second part. It was the only film made that year. Just a little sideline. We have to have a little humor in this, otherwise dour discussion. So what are some of the features of Botswana that gives us a pretty good rating? Botswana had, and as do the other countries we're talking about, English is the official language. Now we can talk about colonial and post-colonial impacts, and I'm just making a sort of neutral statement because we know there's ominous things that happen colonially, but English has been helpful as it links people into the greater world, and thus the countries that have used English as an official language, and I'm delighted to say these countries have not demeaned their tribal languages. They still use those importantly as second tier, but important languages. The countries that have used English, like Botswana, South Africa, Ghana, have found it to be an advantage in their world operations. Now, in Botswana, again, small, 2.5 million, 60% are Christian, and 40% are of indigenous faiths. And again, Kathy and I were chatting about the important role of religion in Africa. Christianity, and including in evangelical Christianity, has been on the rise. The type of Christianity that we feature here through our church, which we're very, I say, blessed to have, I certainly fully support it, is not on the rise in Africa. Are there folks like us, like with the beliefs we have through Methodism and as we play out here? Yes, there are. It is not on the rise. It is not on the rise. Evangelical Christianity is more on the rise. But having said that, in Botswana, which used to be, by the way, for those of you, because we got a whole bunch of good historians here, it used to be called Bechuana land. Yeah, you think so, yeah. Oh yeah, like the other one was Swaziland. This used to be Bechuana land when it was under British rule. There, the Dikosi, that's Dikosi, the Dikosi tribal chiefs, then and now, still play an important role. We mentioned it for Mozambique and other ways. In Botswana, the tribal chiefs are still revered, and they have say, and they have power, and they're independent minded. When folks in Namibia or Zimbabwe or South Africa or any of the other countries down there said, hey, Botswana, want to join in or work with us in a more confederated way, aided by the tribal chiefs, they said, no way. We're staying independent, and we like it. The Botswana Democratic Party, led by Eric Masisi, who's the president, is important. It's, again, I feel it's a liberal democracy. They work very hard to incorporate all people, including the San people. They have a relatively strong economy with little debt. But I must tell you, and you won't believe the GDP. The GDP is $16,000 per person. That's really high for a developing nation. Really high. That's the good news. Mining and minerals, important, of course, but here's some bad. And tourism. The tourism is wonderful. High unemployment, including for young people. Very high unemployment. That's one of their negatives. Yeah, somebody else had a question, or Steve had a question.
Peter, how many African countries would still have laws against homosexual or gay activity?
Well, that's a good interjection of our discussion. Excuse me, let me.
You brought up
Yeah.
evangelical,
Yep, I did.
conservative, liberal. We always hear about how it's still very
Yes,
dangerous there for
yes.
alternative.
Let me give you two. I don't know about all 54 countries, Steve. I can't say, but
Okay.
I have to tell you, generally, I'm pessimistic about the situation, having raised your very important point. Let me say this. In my view, the most ominous country is Uganda. Museveni, who's been in power for 30 or 40 years, has basically said, with the strict laws passed through parliament, that homosexuality is a crime, number one. If people engage in it, number two, they can be imprisoned. And with certain acts, they can be executed. That's an example of the worst in Africa, Museveni and Uganda. Even though Uganda is doing other things in terms of development, including water resources, which I work on, which are relatively exciting. But in terms of that policy and that situation, Steve, it is disastrous. Now, South Africa generally has been the most open, and they have sponsored gay rights parades.
Really
Yes.
interesting.
Have everybody in South Africa been supportive of those parades? They have not. But have many people of all ethnicities been supportive? They have. So I would contrast to your very good question, from Uganda at the worst to South Africa at perhaps the best.
Thank you.
Thanks for that good question. Well, let's say something about Ghana, another one of the interesting, and in my view, promising countries is vis-a-vis democracy.
From the equatorial country.
Oh, good. Just coming.
For Ghana.
We'll just have time for a few questions here, just a few moments, just about getting there.
Getting us.
So Ghana, 34 million people. You know, again, it's
Where's
on,
Ghana? Central?
it's right over there. Kathy is, will point right at where it is there,
Next to Cote d'Ivoire.
right next to Cote d'Ivoire and Togo.
there it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's Ghana.
Okay.
Again, English is the official language. It has a parliamentary democracy with an executive president who is the head of state. It has a two-party system, a unicameral parliament. It has three effective executive, legislative, and judicial branches. By the way, a number of the countries, a majority, have at some level executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It's that sometimes they're suppressed and not open. We're seeing suppression in our own country in some ways in these areas. We know how tough it can be. But in Ghana, they've had some good success with the balance of those three branches. And by the way, they had earlier constitutions from the 1950s through the 1970s, which they abrogated to get a better constitution, which they feel that they now have. That's interesting. That's interesting.
Togo's was.
Now, also interesting from an anthropologist's point of view, Maxwell Owusu, an indigenous anthropologist, helped Ghana write its constitution. Now, of course, I'm biased since I'm an anthropologist. We don't know everything. We certainly don't. But to know that a social science perspective was brought into the writing of the newest constitution, I think is kind of exciting. Because, for example, he would talk about centralization versus decentralization of the government. He would talk about human rights, things that we care about. He cared about. So another thing too, they've been very strong in respecting their indigenous and tribal traditions. And particularly, they have been interested in supporting, and this will be closing in on near the end here, so we can open it up to Q&A pretty quickly here, Steve.
Okay.
They've been building on tribal and chieftaincy traditions. I mentioned earlier that word that I made up, chieftainly. Well, that was just a made up word. But chieftaincy or chiefdoms are what engage chiefs and their power. Here are about 5 things to think about when we think of chieftaincies, because they still are important in places like Ghana and other African countries. Chiefdoms are in a hierarchy. It's not egalitarian this way. They're in a hierarchy this way. The good ones have management strategies that can be adapted. They have warfare control, traditional warfare which they battled, and contemporary military issues that they confront. They tend to be interested in the centralization of resources, but as Maxwell Owusu, the anthropologist, pointed out, in Ghana at least, a balance between decentralization and centralization. A couple of you said, could I say something about Ethiopia and the Great Rift Valley? It's not on my main agenda today, but since Eric and others are interested in that, I'll say this briefly. That's one of the battles that Ethiopia's had. And it's not a democracy, it's an autocracy. And it's been around centralization versus decentralization of power. That's one of Ethiopia's greatest balances, which they're struggling with. Another thing about chiefdoms is the religious situation often are surrounding a chief, a powerful, even could be a contemporary Christian or Muslim umbrella, but it could be a traditional indigenous faith umbrella. Chiefs respect those and tout them. So that's part what's played out in Ghana. Well, the last couple of things to say here are this. In thinking about democracy, and I mentioned these processes and all the different types, you can see it's not just a singular thing. Here are some of the, sorry, this is kind of a laundry list, but pardon me, it's a friendly laundry list. I don't believe in laundry lists when I give lectures because people say, oh, a laundry list, but this is hopefully a good laundry list. Here are some of the things to think about then in a developing democracy or in our democracy. The integration of the institutions that we have. Are they well integrated and respected? Do we have centrality, back to my point, centrality of decision-making? That's balanced. Do we have coordination of crisis management? Which includes risk management. Do we have socioeconomic viability? Not just economic, but socioeconomic. Do we have, and Kathy asked me the other day what I thought was, if I had to mention a single thing, what would I say? Do we, and you're not going to be surprised, do we have a viable rule of law that is followed?
So far.
And with that rule of law, do we have judicial independence? And I mean, anybody in the world is what I'm speaking. You're nodding because you're talking about our own country and you're like me wrestling with these things. But generally speaking, if I were to name one thing, it would be judicial independence and rule of law. Next, journalistic independence. Next, is there a balance between the police, the military, and the civilian agencies and forces without one over-dominating? Next, are there multiple interactive political parties and platforms? Interactive. Next, is the organization, the entity, the polity, the nation engaged in globalization? I feel into regularized global intercourse is essential for a viable democracy. That's what I feel. Do they have a human rights record, a positive human rights record? And if a social movement like occurred in Sudan about 4 years ago, when the people rose against the dictator, Omar al-Bashir, and said, we need democracy in Sudan, are social movements like that welcomed? They should be. But as a footnote, sadly, I'm sorry to end on a sad note, the social movement that looked so promising in Sudan faltered, and Sudan, as I mentioned earlier, along with South Sudan, is an absolute crisis, one of the worst in the world. The social movement, the civil movement, which engaged, by the way, among the leaders, women and youth, faltered, and the military suppressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Nora Lee.
Peter, I'm interested if you would share your opinion about the deportation of undocumented immigrants from this country to South Sudan.
Oh, to South Sudan?
Yes.
Yes, because that has been a recent development of a small number, as you're correctly pointed out, Nora Lee. It's a travesty for two reasons, in my opinion. First of all, I think every undocumented person should be vetted and should have a chance to stand before a judge and to be given a fair chance to discuss their situation and not just be shipped off somewhere willy-nilly. That's the first thing I believe. The second thing, maybe there's three things I believe about this normally. A second thing I believe is that if the person has been a criminal and is being deported, I still think they need a fair chance and need to be able to speak to a judge. But if they're being deported, it should ideally be back to the country that they're from.
Right.
So that maybe maybe they'd be imprisoned or maybe they'd have a chance to rehabilitate. But I'm in favor of every human. I've met people in prison. I have visited prisons. I support every person and give for a chance. And then my third point is South Sudan is not the appropriate place, given its tragic circumstances, to receive people, only one of whom in that list had come from South Sudan. The others had not even come from that country. It's a travesty. Thank you for asking.
Gene.
Gene.
Peter, one gets the impression, this is foreign policy, one gets the impression because of the competition for Africa's mineral rights and so forth, that America's influence, I'm using the word influence, is waning, that China and Russia being very aggressive. Do you care to comment if that is in fact true and what are the reasons?
As it relates to Africa, yeah. Good one, Jane. Very good one. I had the privilege several years ago, as Kathy knows, to meet and spend time with General Carter Ham. He was the head of AFRICOM, the U.S. operation for all of Africa. He was my guest at the University of Denver. We had a wonderful time and a wonderful dialogue with myself, the faculty, and the students. And General Carter Ham told me and others that the U.S. presence, as it relates now, I'm just going to go to the military side of this for a moment, Gene, was solid but small, realistically, in Africa. The main base for the U.S. military in Africa is in Djibouti.
Yes.
Do you have Djibouti on the screen there, Steve, with your great, right over near,
Really permanent base.
yeah, right over near, right over
South Africa?
just north of Ethiopia. Yeah, so it's back over. Yeah. Djibouti is green, little bitty country there. You're getting close. There's Djibouti. Okay, so Carter Ham was based in Djibouti. That's where our primary base in Africa is and remains, truncated, and he said the military presence was more of a training than anything else for African people, training operation, and that was fine. And we had a very good chat about the pros and cons of that. Now to China. China has increased its impetus, and I have mixed feelings about China's impetus. They have tremendous wealth. They've had a tremendous increasing thrust in Africa in the last several decades. Their thrust is primarily economic. For example, when I visited a small town in Ethiopia where we're helping put in a water well, I visited a Chinese encampment, then abandoned. The Chinese had come in, worked on some systems in this town, lived in their own enclosed encampment. I talked to Ethiopians. They said, the Chinese never talked to us. They just did their thing and left. I looked at their abandoned dormitories, literally, they were abandoned dormitories. And I don't want to demean Chinese people. I know wonderful Chinese people, but the general Chinese thrust has been economic, not too engaging sociologically, and I'm sorry to say, not very engaging human rights wise. Isn't it interesting that when I met another gentleman in Ethiopia, I was out on a remote, newly paved highway in the middle of nowhere. I get to these strange places, as Kathy knows. and Steve and Rebecca know. So I was out in the middle of nowhere talking to this man, using an interpreter. And I said, do you know about human rights here in you're part of Ethiopia? He's just a regular villager. He said, oh, absolutely. I know about human rights. I said, terrific. How would you define them? I would define them as the Chinese coming in and paying for this asphalt highway that I'm benefiting to use. That's my human right. I love the Chinese. They built this highway. Isn't that an interesting thrust on human rights with an economic oomph
Yeah.
and not really anything else? So these are the things that we wrestle with. Gene, a terrific question you asked. Eric.
And the Chinese also built their military base in Djibouti in 2017.
Chinese are
So
have that incursion. That's they sure do.
So the US and Chinese are both based.
Right in the same area.
Djibouti, same area.
By the way, speaking of China, if we could go back to your overall screen there just for a moment, and I know we're just about out of time, Steve. But right there, if you could go to Ethiopia, yeah, thank you. The Chinese have in part been helping fund a railroad enhancement in Ethiopia, major railroad line enhancement. Again, economic. And by the way, it's faltering. I'm sorry to say, I'm in favor of it. I hope it'll help people. It's faltering.
Is that the one that just stopped? They never finished it?
Yeah, it basically stopped out in the middle of the savannah.
Stopped.
Yeah, the rail line to nowhere, Alice. Yeah.
I wish we could go longer.
But we
So-
can't.
Yeah, that was the last thing that we have, Jane. Thank you, because that is purposeful is the last thing. So I'll come over with my good pal Kathy. And we will demonstrate these pictures. Because I think this reflects the beautiful diversity of Africa. This woman allowed me to take her picture. We're speaking of Sudan. I promised you we'd say something more about Sudan. Here it is. She's in Darfur years ago in Western Sudan, where all the tragedy is, where the genocide is. Her people are among those being killed. I said, could I take your photo? She said, well, if my father gives you permission.
Oh, wow.
That's the way it works over there. And if my brother gives you permission, I said, fine, that's the way it works. That's fine. They gave me permission. And she said, now, we can't take my photo here near the village. There's too many people around.
Oh,
We'll have to walk to a private place to take my photo. I said, I'm willing. So we walked, it was about 110 degrees. We walked a half a mile
Wow.
and found a tree. And she nicely posed for me. Lovely young lady. Her group is among those subject to genocide. And now, by contrast, this gentleman, another one of my favorites. I know we're going over a little bit, Steve, but this was
That's okay.
the last part.
Okay.
This gentleman, again, one of my favorites. Again, during the same trip in Western Sudan. And I met him. He was standing next to three other sheikh. You remember when we're kids, we'd all talk the sheikh.
Yeah.
Well, the proper word is sheikh. He was among three sheikh standing there on the side of the road. And being an unshy person, needless to say, I stopped to talk to him. That's how you meet people unexpectedly. He's in my book, Encounters, which is my book about the strangers I've met around the world. He's in there. So in Arabic, which my good friend Mohammed helped me translate from English to Arabic because I don't speak Arabic. I said, sir, here you are. I see these camels nearby. Yes, he said. That's all he said. I said, sir, so pleased to meet you. He said, well, I'm pleased to meet you, sir. He called me sir, even though he was older than me. And I said, sir, might I ask you how many wives you have? Because he's a Muslim.
Oh, okay.
And he was very polite and said, sir, that's none of your business. Yeah. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
But I don't give up easily.
We want to know.
Yeah. So second, I said, sir, I understand. Thank you so much for your answer, your non-answer. How many children do you have? And he said, sir, that's also none of your business.
Oh.
Terrific. Very polite. And the other two checked, they were standing to the left and right, were just looking, listening, not saying anything. Then I said, well, three is a charm, right? So I'll ask one more question. So, sir, here are these camels. How many camels do you have? He said, that's also none of your business. Now, here's what's cool about that. And then we carried on with some other conversation. It was delightful. The ominous news is he represents the killers of Western Sudan. I'm not saying that he's a killer. This is some years ago when I met him. And I'm not saying the lady I showed you was killed. She represents the group that was killed. He represents one of the group was doing the killing. He's a nomad. The nomads generally are wealthier than the sedentary people. Why? Because they have huge herds of camels, cattle, sheep, and goats.
And wives.
Many, and my friends, I have to tell you, they're thoughtful about other people, but wives are a resource. And children are a resource, and camels are a resource.
Wow.
That's just the way it is. Does it mean they love their wives? Yes. In most cases, yes. They love their children? Yes. They love their camels equally. But I learned something by him not answering any of those questions. It was almost as better than him answering the questions, because I realized a few moments later that with the two other sheikh, who in fact were from different clans, him talking like that and answering and kind of maybe bragging, because he was clearly wealthy by all the camels I saw, would be seen, and you don't brag. You do not brag. And you don't put yourself above other sheikh.
Oh, well, true.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. You got very good. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.